In the year 2050, the world was a very different place than it had been just a few decades earlier. Climate change had caused massive disruption, resource scarcity had led to wars and conflict, and technology had advanced in ways that no one could have predicted. One man, Griffin, had always been fascinated by the past. But unlike many of his contemporaries, he wasn't interested in history for its own sake. He was obsessed with a singular goal: to prevent the horrors of the past from repeating themselves. Ever since he was a child, Griffin had been terrified of the Second World War. He had heard stories from his grandparents about the atrocities committed by the Nazis, and he was determined to make sure that history never repeated itself. As a brilliant physicist, Griffin had spent his entire career working on a time machine that could transport him back to the past. His ultimate goal was to go back in time and kill Adolf Hitler before he could rise to power and start the war. Griffin had always been a curious child, taking apart his toys and putting them back together just to see how they worked. As he grew older, he turned his attention to more complex machines, building his own computers and tinkering with electronic devices. When he decided to build a time machine, Griffin knew that it was the most ambitious project he had ever undertaken. He spent years studying the theories of time travel, poring over every scientific paper and book on the subject. But it wasn't just the theoretical knowledge that Griffin needed. He also had to build the machine itself, and that meant coming up with a whole new set of technologies and materials. Griffin worked tirelessly on his time machine for years, fueled by a passion to change history and a desire to make a difference in the world. He scavenged parts from old machines and gadgets, piecing them together like a mad scientist. But there was always something missing, some critical component that he couldn't quite figure out. One day, while exploring a remote cave system in the mountains, he stumbled upon a strange, glowing stone. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and he knew immediately that it was the missing piece of his puzzle. With trembling hands, he carefully extracted the stone from its resting place and brought it back to his lab. Over the next few weeks, Griffin worked tirelessly, integrating the stone into his time machine's power system. It was a delicate process, but he was determined to make it work. And finally, after countless late nights and long hours of tinkering, he succeeded. The machine came to life with a soft hum, and Griffin felt a thrill of excitement shoot through him. Now that he had a working prototype, Griffin set to work building a full-size time machine. It was a daunting task, but with his experience building the prototype and his newfound source of energy, he was able to make rapid progress. After months of work, the time machine was complete. It was a beautiful, sleek machine, with a polished metal exterior and glowing control panels. Griffin couldn't wait to test it out. Griffin wanted to make his dream come true. He wanted to kill Adolf Hitler by going back in time. As Griffin was considering his options, he came to a shocking realization. Killing Hitler may not be enough. Hitler's mother and father would still meet each other, and they may have other children who would carry on Hitler's legacy. Griffin knew what he had to do. He had to prevent Hitler's parents from ever meeting. He used the time machine to travel back even further in time, to the year 1889, where he managed to track down Hitler's father, Alois. One night, just before Alois was set to meet his future wife, Griffin made his move. He snuck into Alois's room and shot him with a silenced pistol. With Alois out of the picture, Hitler's parents never met each other, and Hitler was never born. As Griffin returned to the present day using his time machine, he was met with a jarring sight. The world he had left behind was gone, replaced with one that was vastly different. In this new timeline, Hitler never rose to power, but World War II still occurred due to the actions of other countries. Without Hitler's aggression and the subsequent war, the Soviet Union was able to emerge from World War II as the dominant power in Europe, with vast territories and a powerful military. The lack of a strong Germany and its allies to counterbalance the Soviet Union's power allowed the USSR to expand its influence across the continent, including into Germany itself. But tensions between the Soviet Union and the Western powers continued to simmer, and eventually boiled over into a new world war. This time, however, the war was not fought along the same ideological lines as the previous one. The war began with a dispute over control of resources in the Middle East, with the Soviet Union and the United States each supporting different sides in the conflict. As the war escalated, it drew in more and more countries, until it became a global conflict. The war was brutal and devastating, with some of the most advanced weaponry and tactics the world had ever seen. But ultimately, the Soviet Union emerged victorious. It had used its vast military and economic power to crush the opposition, and had taken control of nearly all of Europe. In this new timeline, the world was a vastly different place. The Soviet Union was the dominant global superpower, with the United States relegated to a secondary role. The Cold War never happened, since the Soviet Union was not in competition with the West for ideological supremacy. But the world was far from a peaceful place. Under Soviet rule, Europe was tightly controlled, with political opposition brutally suppressed. The Soviet Union's sphere of influence extended far beyond Europe, with countries in Africa and Asia also falling under its sway. As Griffin looked around at this new world, he realized that his attempt to prevent the atrocities of the past had only led to different, but equally devastating ones. The lesson he learned was a difficult one, that history is a complex web of cause and effect, and that even the best intentions can have unintended consequences. In the end, he was left with a haunting question. Was it better to let history unfold as it did, or to try to change it? That's it for this story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel and sharing this video with your friends. Thanks for watching.